What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of SSPN. I'm Jude, that's Ethan, and today we're going to be talking about a trending topic, Ethan. We're going to hop on the trends here. I know
Mm,
normally, we definitely still do hop on the trends, but normally, we like to, I guess, do our own thing, come up with our own ideas, but this is something that I've been seeing on Spurs Twitter, on the Spurs interwebs, however you want to verbalize it as of late, and that is the idea of jumping up into either the lottery or the late just this, the lottery or the second half of the first round. They're both 15 picks each. It's basically jumping somewhere into the first round to go get another playmaker or another guard specifically. I mean, there's so many tweets that I could pull up right now. I know it's like, yes, I could go and I could go to Evan Townsend's profile. He's made a lot and he makes a lot of great content, by the way. That's not a diss. I'm
yeah.
just saying, but like I could go pull it up on screen share, but there's really no point. If you watch this podcast and this YouTube channel, you've probably been seeing it. Just we were just talking about it a little bit off air before we started, and I was just kind of like, man, like I was not expecting to be watching these Kobe Buffkin and these Jalen Hood Shafino highlights, bro,
Yeah,
before
yeah.
the like just after getting the number one pick. And I'm not even opposed to it. I really see the line of thinking for everybody. This is a really deep draft. As much as I was like, why am I watching these? I, see the appeal and the talent of these guys. There's a handful, about five or four guards, kind of in that range from the late lottery to around the 20s, or the late teens, excuse me, kind of that 10 pick range that could all kind of go there, that a lot of these Spurs fans and Spurs media accounts and stuff have been
Mhm.
talking about potentially trading up to get one of those guys because it's such a deep draft and because we have the assets and because, as you're about to allude to, there's kind of this sense of maybe wanting to get a Robin next to Victor Wembanyama after getting the first pick. The floor is yours, Ethan. Tell me what you think about all this.
Yeah, the logic is sound, right? I mean, we have our Shaq now. It would only make sense for the fan base to want to instantly go out and find the Kobe that goes along with that Shaq. Um, I want to put a stopper in any talk about getting a top five pick. I think that's out of the question. Like, this doesn't seem at all possible for the people that want us to go trade for Scoot or Amen Thompson or somehow. I just don't see that happening. It's much more likely that we would try and maybe get into that 10, 11, 12, or even the 20s to try and either get Anthony Black on the high end or some of those names that you were just referring to in that late teens area. Um, Anthony Black kind of sets himself apart as being a very versatile, like 6'6" point guard that has playmaking ability. He's similar to maybe Josh Giddey offensively, but defensively, like you have talked about in the past, kind of the DeJounte archetype of being long and able to guard 1 through 3. I see the appeal there. Um, every
Lonzo Ball, that's
Lonzo
another
Ball, that's
comparison
a
I've
great
seen.
one. That's a great one, and I completely understand, especially since I love Trey Jones. I've been on the Trey Jones bandwagon since we
Me too.
drafted him, but I think we both agree, and a lot of the Spurs fans agree, that his ceiling is probably a very, very talented backup, very
Just
similar to
like
his
his
brother,
brother.
Tyus Jones. Yes. So if we are to draft someone outside of Victor, you would want it to maybe be a point guard to kind of fill that hole in our roster. That's really the only spot that we really need an improvement for. And I don't think we're going to splurge on a Kyrie Irving or a James Harden. That's out of the question. So I understand where all these fans are coming from. As far as a draft night trade, there's so many variables, Jude. Like who's falling, who's got a pick that they're willing to trade. How much are we going to have to give up? Will it just be 2 seconds? Will it be a future first? Is that protected? Is it not protected? Like, there's so many questions that go into it. I find it kind of unlikely, and I wouldn't be against it necessarily, especially if it is Anthony Black. But for everybody else, I kind of don't want to make those trades because of, and we were talking about this right beforehand, we still have Blake Wesley on the roster that we took last year in the first round, in the 20s, I believe. Was it 25?
Yep.
25. So he's a first round talent. He's a combo guard,
And he
similar to
was
the rest
someone
of
who
the
kind of
guys.
fell, not to
Yeah,
interrupt you there, but
no,
he didn't fall as much as Malachi, but he was more like on Jay Billis's big board. He was in the teens.
yes. And when we discuss these guards that are in this draft, while this is a very deep draft, a lot of their upside is upside. It's like potential. They could be very good players down the line. And that's exactly what we were talking about with Blake Wesley last year going into the draft. Like, he has a lot of raw ability. And if we are somehow able to harness that and get his turnovers under control, he's a very talented point guard or a combo guard that can both score and play make. And we've seen flashes of it. Sure, it's inconsistent at times and he had his rough patches, but I'm not willing to give up on him
But who's
immediately.
to say that a similar player with a similar
Yeah,
build this year doesn't have the same
the
year?
exact same thing.
And I know that a lot of people in the comments might be like, "No, this player is so much different than Blake Wesley." But it's like,
Yeah.
it's just like, but if they're rated at a very similar evaluation, I guess is the wording I could use
Yeah.
there. Like, uh,
Time will tell.
Right. You never know. It's a crapshoot, but the fact that they're in the same range would indicate that it's probably going to be a similar thing where it'll take them a little bit. There are some guys that I might say have a higher look a little bit better than Blake, but then
Mhm.
it's like if I go back and watch Blake's Notre Dame highlights, I might be like, "Oh no, they look exactly the same." You see what I'm saying? Because
I
we
do.
have a little bit of bias from watching this season and seeing him struggle, but it's like when those guys start playing the same guys Blake
Yeah.
does, they might look very similar. And as we forget throughout this year, Blake had a really stellar campaign in the G League, averaged 20
Mhm.
points.
And he had a stretch of like 5 games before he got hurt where he
Yeah,
looked very
when he
good. And we
first
were
came in.
we were talking about like, oh, we're not even going to miss Josh Primo. Like this guy's NBA ready.
Right.
And then he got hurt and he came back and he had his struggles. I do think part of the push to get like another guard in this draft has to do with us losing out on Josh Primo and all of his allegations. He's no longer on the team. So it kind of feels like we want to make up for that in a way. And I get that
Yeah,
as well, but I don't know if you can compound not a Spurs mistake. I don't know if you can compound that difficulty by trading a couple picks and trying to somehow make up for that. I don't see that as like a sound logical reasoning in my
I
book.
think a little bit, and this kind of goes with the internet. And I'm not trying to offend anybody when I say this because we're
Mhm.
thankful for a lot of you internet people because obviously
Yes.
our show's right here on the internet. But
Yes.
at the same time, I think there's a lot of people that, okay, we got number one. Now they hear Victor say, "Oh, I want to win a ring ASAP." Like, and then they just want to go plug every hole on the roster because we have
Yep.
all these, draft picks that we could use. I use a lot of 2K terms on this show from time to time, and I think this is right now. Everybody's looking at it like it's a my league, and they're
Yeah.
like, "This is the time to go get somebody. We got all the assets. We got Victor. Let's go get another the top player in this deep draft." But I'm kind of with you. I really feel like Anthony Black is the only one that like, okay, I'm willing to really pay the price for this.
Yeah.
Um, and that just we didn't do a prospect profile on him because we stopped doing the prospect profiles
Once we got the number one pick.
after the Spurs got the number one pick. But he's somebody who is super appealing to me. I think there's not that big of a gap between him and Amen Thompson at the point guard position. I think he's a little bit less explosive athletically, but other than that, I honestly think that they're really similar players. So if you could get him at like 9 or something, I think that would definitely be a steal. Or any team that even does get him, if they get him in that range. I'm not even necessarily saying the Spurs. I think that would be a steal. I think he's kind of somebody who's overlooked in this draft because of the Thompson twins coming out of OTE and their,
Yeah.
crazy highlights and hype and all that stuff.
They're definitely more explosive, but I keep alluding to Josh Giddey only because Josh Giddey was so unassuming going into the draft, but he's by far, as far as that draft is concerned, like the most talented point guard. And I
Yeah.
feel like Anthony Black could maybe eventually get to that point, especially since he's so well rounded in so many areas. But he to me is the only guy I would consider trading up for, like you said. Everyone else kind of blends in my opinion. But in
Hmm.
the top 9, I don't see any of those teams trading away their pick. Personally, I think that they're in a place where they want to take whoever's available. Maybe Mavericks would want to trade 10, but even they would want
Orlando or
Orlando
maybe
do well.
Oklahoma City as well.
Those 3 to me are the teams that would be willing to make a trade. Orlando because they already have a top. They have the 5th pick, the 6th pick
Yeah.
already, so they don't necessarily need the second one. They might be willing to trade it. Um, Oklahoma City because I think they're really trying to make a push next year. Plus, they don't really need a point guard with Shea Gilgeous and Josh Giddey on the team already, so maybe they'd be willing to do that. But Dallas, I think that they would want player compensation, not necessarily draft pick compensation. And I don't know if we
Hmm.
have anything that's appealing enough to them. What Doug, Like, I don't know if they really want Doug McDermott. Like, they really need defense right now, and Doug's, he's a good floor spacer for Luka, but he's not going to fix any of their team needs.
Right. Right. So I think, yeah, that's another interesting part is what the suitors would want as well. That's something you definitely got to keep in mind. But probably the reason why this is super appealing to a lot of people here, Ethan, is because when you scroll down here, and this is just the first mock draft that pops up, CBS, shout out to Kyle Boone. Um, at 11 and at 12, you've got Anthony Black and Cason Wallace, and those are some of the guys that that the Spurs Twitter has been talking about specifically. I saw some comparisons to Cason Wallace on Spurs Twitter. People are calling him a baby Kawhi. He's definitely talked about a lot when it comes to his defense. I'm not saying he's necessarily going to be there. I'm just saying those are some of the things that we've been hearing. And also Kobe Buffkin. He's just, these are kind of the picks that probably, I don't know if we'd make another move with the Raptors necessarily, but like this kind of range is where, and these type of players are what the people on Spurs Twitter are talking about. And I understand that all these guys, have a higher ceiling than Trey, bluntly. So I get the logic, but at the same time, I'm just like, do we really need to force it? And I've seen a lot of other mock drafts that have Anthony Black a lot higher. This is just one. But I just wanted to bring this up to kind of
Yeah,
give some added context.
for sure. And I think Toronto's actually the least likely to trade their pick
For
side
sure.
note, because it feels like to me with their new hire of their new head coach, something Griffin,
Adrian
Adrian
Griffin.
Griffin.
Well, the
He's
Bucks hired him.
how Bucks hired him. What am I thinking? Yeah, they haven't hired a new head coach, but I thought that they were shopping Pascal, and then might
Well,
lose Fred Van Fleet. They might be heading for a
They
rebuild too.
fired they fired Nick Nurse,
Hmm.
and then now their top assistant's leaving as well. So,
Yeah, I think they're shopping Pascal. Poor Jakob. Poor Jakob.
oh my gosh, we shipped Jakob. Meanwhile,
Well, he might sign to a different team, right? He's unrestricted, so
yes,
he
he
could
is. That's
technically
true.
leave.
Actually, he's a free agent, so yeah, that doesn't apply.
Yeah, he could technically leave, but
Imagine if he had like 2 years, or he's
oh
like
yeah,
re-signed a contract before this season, like before the deadline
yeah,
extended
no.
with the Raptors. Sorry, bud.
Poor Jakob.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
No, but what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, but at the end of the day, I think it might be just a smarter move for the Spurs to hold on to their draft capital that they're stocking up, continue to stock up on capital, and then down the line, when Victor's ready to really make a push, as a superstar in the playoffs, then we trade some of those picks for another All Star or something like that, rather than somebody that really hasn't proven anything yet in the draft. That's my preference.
Yeah, and I mean, like, think about, okay, so you have Malachi's season, right? And he
Hmm.
was obviously, he you could argue he would be more comparable to these guys
Yeah.
just whenever it comes to his pre-draft projection. But the thing is, other than like Kobe Buffkin, like, let me see, and Jalen Hood Shafino's got some shot creation as well. Nick Smith, he's someone who's kind of fell down a little bit more, but coming into this year, he was somebody who was a potential projected lottery pick.
Amari
Um,
Bailey.
yeah, that's another one. He's more of a two guard, and he's a little bit more undersized. So I feel like, I mean, like, unless the Spurs are going to turn these dudes in to point guards, but then it's like that's kind of what you're already doing with Blake, and I just don't see it. Like, I watched this Jalen Hood Shafino guy. I'll say that I liked him a little bit more than I liked Kobe Buffkin.
Mhm.
But that's just because it seemed like he was more of a natural playmaker, and Kobe seemed like more of a natural too. I think he'd be a fine, talented player. Seemed like the best scorer on Michigan's team this year, obviously, but and one of the more talented players on the team overall. But just anyways, man, I'm just like I'm not can when we have I'm not convinced that they're not going to do the same thing as Blake. I already said that in this video, and I'm just once again coming back to this conclusion. We're
Yeah.
talking about it, and I don't want to like crap on anybody because I get it, but I think it's just like everybody's just jumping on like, okay, let's go use our assets right now because we have our franchise centerpiece, and it's like it's going to take some time. Like, we've still got to kind of slow cook this thing, and maybe they really would be super high upside and they'd come in and they'd play just like Malachi, but it's like Malachi even had some struggles.
Hmm.
He
He
it
worked
really
a lot of it.
it took him really until the second half of the season until we started seeing the Malachi that we talk about in our videos now. You know what I'm saying? In the way that we talk about him. We weren't talking about him that way early in the season. Now, granted, we were like, it's really his shots just got to fall. His shot was a little flat coming out. And the shots were never bad. That was something that was consistent even when he struggled at the beginning of the year. But it's like those things are going to happen for these rookies inevitably. And we're still not a playoff team even. So it's like those weaknesses will be exposed. And so at that point, it's like Blake might take a jump. And even if he doesn't, Malachi might take another jump, playmaking wise. We'll see what happens with that. We talked about that in the lineups video that we just did. And then the other thing with all of this, Ethan, to go back to your original point that we probably haven't even talked about enough, is that all of this really depends on what happens with everybody else. And the key thing here is that it also depends on who the Spurs really like. Because if the Spurs don't like any of these guys, we've been
Yeah.
talking here for 15 minutes and none of it matters, you know?
Yeah. Very true. I didn't even think
Because
about
we
that.
picked Josh Primo at 11. Like, and
Yeah,
it's not like just to bring him up, it's just to explain, like, under Brian Wright, they see some things sometimes that, are not consistent, that are not on all the mock drafts online.
for sure, for sure. And I think they've been pretty like stand pat on like we're playing this super slow. Like they're not trying to make
Yes.
any big moves. They haven't given any inclination that they're trying to make trades. Really, that's to my
Yeah.
knowledge.
In fact, it seems like they've made more inclinations publicly that they're going to slow cook this
Yeah.
thing, from the Zach Lowe podcast that came out after the lottery,
Mhm.
and the two appearances that Brian Wright, he went on Stephen A. Smith, and then he was on ESPN again for the draft combine.
Yep.
They were just talking about taking everything slow. There was another press conference that he did. He feels like he said he feels like the roster has a lot of second and third year guys that can really, that fit the timeline well,
Mhm.
basically. And obviously he likes all of those dudes. He picked them, he
Yeah.
evaled them. So I just don't, maybe, like if they really don't believe in Blake Wesley, we could make a move up. And that's another thing. I will get into something a little bit later because I do want to talk about the possibility of maybe just like a late first round, like packaging our second round picks to get something in the late first round. And that would be a completely different caliber player than these guys. And I think that would be, a little bit more reasonable. And like, I would be totally cool with that. But getting back to what I was just saying, it's just like, anyways, Brian Wright was basically alluding to the fact that they're going to keep everybody. And this year, they're going to see how many games Victor plays. And this is more in the Zach Lowe podcast, but how many games Victor plays, how everybody fits around him, how all these young, talented players perform, next to him. Which ideally it should make their jobs easier. And if it doesn't, then you learn some things about those guys. But it kind of is just the next step. This year was an evaluation, and this next year will kind of be the same thing, not as in necessarily like the wins and losses. And once again, we've said multiple times, we don't think the Spurs are necessarily going to be a playoff team. They'll probably be right back in the lottery, less odds, but still,
Mhm.
in that 30 win range. I just don't see it, Ethan. I'm kind of
Yeah.
losing my train of thought
No,
here
no,
at the
you're
end,
completely
but
right.
the point is I just don't see it.
No, you're
Yeah.
completely correct. This year is going to be all about giving the opportunity to Blake, to Malachi, to Julian, all these guys, and letting them play alongside Devin and Keldon and Victor, and letting them kind of figure out their roles, see who's going to be compatible on the team. Maybe Blake regresses, maybe he goes through the roof. Who knows? We don't
Right.
know. It's time for him and everybody else on the team really to prove to us and to the front office,
But it's
why
like,
we
why
should
would you
keep him around.
waste these assets to get the
Yeah,
same thing as him that
exactly.
might just be in the G League again? And then, you're just back to, and you just wasted these assets when you're not even going to contend this year. There's no
Agreed.
point to really like just go like this big demand to go get one. Like I
Yep.
said, we both like Anthony Black. We wouldn't be mad if that happens, but
Agreed. Agreed.
there was something else. There's another point that I wanted to get to, Ethan. I know I talked about how we could potentially, trade, package the 2 second rounders we have, and maybe, like there's one I think are like 2025. It could be a different year, but one of those years. But we have a Charlotte pick that's
Hmm.
lottery protected. Like I wouldn't mind packaging that pick because they could definitely be in the lottery. And then the 2 second round picks if a team is willing at like 29 or 30 or like 28
Yeah.
range. Like I would totally be down to do that. But teams may still say no. And then at that point, just take your flyers on second rounders. I'm not mad at that at all. Nikola Jokic, second round pick. Manu Ginobili, second round pick. I'm not
Trey
saying
Jones, second round pick.
I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but
Yeah.
you never know. You could take your flyers on guys. Yeah, Ethan, I think that's a good 20 minutes though, discussing this, man. What
Yeah,
do you think?
agreed. I agree. I don't think we have anything else to say.
I feel like I do though, Ethan, and I was trying. That was kind of a ploy for me to buy some more time, but it still didn't work. Anyways, thank y'all for hanging out with us today. Tell us what you think about the Spurs potentially trading up to do this year. Like we said, we kind of understand the logic, but also it's just like they're gonna slow cook this thing. This is what I was gonna say, Ethan. I bought myself enough time.
Mm,
Zach Lowe said in that podcast that basically next year, after they figure that out this year, like
mhm,
next year would be the one that they would be like, okay, do we feel like if Victor just comes out and is a stud, like okay, maybe we want to make some moves to really try to put some guys around him to make us a contender, or maybe not a contender, but a team that can make a deep playoff run with him,
mm,
or getting closer to a contender. Or maybe, you realize, okay, we need some more vets to kind of help slow cook this thing even more. The point is, once again, evaluation season, and then they'll really make the moves next year, which is what you were saying would be the appeal of doing that. And he said that, and I forgot to say that. But
agreed.
but thank y'all for tuning in to SSPN today. We appreciate you guys. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to like and subscribe below. We appreciate all of y'all hopping on the SSPN train as of late. If you're new to the channel, thank you for joining the fam. And if you want to stay updated with everything, follow us on Twitter at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate y'all. We'll catch y'all on the next one. We'll see y'all later.